The dust of time rested on the old wooden chest, hidden in the attic of an old house in the Russian countryside. It was one of those places forgotten by time, where every object told a lost story. The boards creaked under the hesitant steps of a young historian named Alexei, who, wearing white gloves, meticulously cleaned each item he found. His mission was to catalogue old documents, but he never imagined that that day would change his life, and the lives of many others. Upon opening the trunk, a smell of the past wafted into the air, a mix of aged wood and old paper. Among yellowed photographs, military medals, and small belongings from a forgotten time, his eyes fell on a sealed envelope. The faded ink still kept a recipient's name legible. To Anna, with all my love, Viktor Petrov. Alexei felt a shiver run down his spine. Who was Viktor Petrov? Who was Anna? And why did this letter never reach its destination? With trembling hands, he took the envelope and, with all the care in the world, slid his fingers along the edge, breaking the seal that time had almost consolidated as eternal. Inside, a precisely folded paper bore firm yet slightly shaky handwriting, as if it had been written under strong emotion or difficult circumstances. Before he even started reading, something inside him said that the letter contained more than just words. It was a testimony of love, an echo from a distant past that still needed to be heard. He took a deep breath and started reading. My sweet Anna, if you are reading this letter, it means I have not returned to you. The impact of those words was immediate. His heart raced. His mind imagined the scenario in which those lines were written. Who was that man who said goodbye to his beloved with such tenderness? How had this letter been lost in time, preventing Anna from knowing Viktor's last words? There, in the silence of the attic, Alexei understood that he was facing something much bigger than a simple historical document. It was a bridge between the past and the present, proof that love, even interrupted by war, never goes out. And, at that moment, he decided this story needed to be told. The sky was cloudy that afternoon in St. Petersburg, and the cold autumn winds blew through the city's alleys, carrying dry leaves that danced in the air. Alexei, the young historian, still felt his heart racing after reading the first words of the letter. Sitting on the dusty floor of the attic, he held the piece of paper with an almost religious reverence. It was as if he was somehow holding the soul of a man who lived decades before, a man he loved fiercely and who, somehow, still wanted to be heard. The trunk where he found the letter appeared to belong to a family that had lived there for generations. The old mansion, with its peeling walls and furniture covered in white sheets, was a forgotten relic of time. That house was about to be renovated, and he had been sent there to catalogue any historical items that might be of value to a local museum. But now, holding that envelope, he felt that he had found something much more valuable than simple artifacts of war. Alexei took a small notepad out of his pocket and scribbled down a few words. Letter dating possibly from World War II, written by a soldier named Viktor Petrov, intended for a woman named Anna, undelivered, context unknown. He needed more information. Who had lived there? Had Anna lived in that house? Or had the letter been brought by someone else? The historian knew that, to answer these questions, he needed to investigate deeply. He took the letter to a table by the window and analyzed it in the daylight. The paper was yellowed but surprisingly well preserved. The ink, although slightly faded, still allowed you to read every word. Next to the envelope was a black and white photo. He picked it up and felt a lump in his throat. In the image, a young soldier in uniform stared at the camera. His eyes were intense, filled with a determination that contrasted with the lightness of his smile. Beside him, a young woman with long, wavy hair leaned on his shoulder. Her eyes also shone, but there was a hint of sadness in them, as if she already knew that this moment could be a goodbye. Yours, Viktor and Anna. Alexei swallowed. In that instant, he realized that he was not just dealing with a historical document. I was faced with a love story lost in time. Determined to find out what had happened to Viktor and Anna, he began his research. He rummaged through old records, talked to older residents in the neighborhood, and even visited libraries and military archives. Each new piece of information seemed to form a puzzle that had been waiting for decades to be put together. And then one day, he found what seemed like a definitive clue. In the archives of the Russian army, a document caught attention. Viktor Petrov's name was among the soldiers missing in action during the Second World War. There was no record of his return. He never came home. But what about Anna? Did she wait for him? Did she learn of her beloved's fate? The answers were somewhere, and Alexia wouldn't rest until he found them. Viktor Petrov was born in 1919, in the heart of a Russia that was still recovering from the echoes of the 1917 revolution. His village, a small settlement on the outskirts of Leningrad, was a place of harsh winters and short summers, where people worked hard and learned from an early age that life was made of sacrifices. His father, Sergei Petrov, was a veteran of the First World War, a man of few words and a distant look, as if he had never really returned from the battlefield. His mother, Irina, was the heart of the family, a woman of unshakable strength, whose hands, calloused from farming, were still able to weave the most beautiful embroidery on long winter nights. Since he was little, Viktor has been a restless boy, full of energy and dreams. He was known for his courage, whether climbing the tallest trees in the village or taking on the older boys in play fighting. But behind this bravery, there was a young man with a sensitive heart who liked to listen to the stories of his elders and who was easily moved by the tragedies of Russian folk songs. It was on one of these afternoons, while listening to the sad melody of a violin in the central square, that Viktor saw Anna for the first time. She had her hair loose in the wind and a light blue dress that contrasted with the grey sky. His eyes, an intense green, shone as if they carried all the seasons of the year within them. At that moment, Viktor knew that his life would never be the same again. The two met through a mutual friend and soon became inseparable. Viktor did everything to impress her, from small gestures, like bringing flowers stolen from the village gardens, to promising that one day he would take her to see the world. Anna, in turn, laughed at his bravado, but deep down, she loved every word. She saw in him not just a young man full of dreams, but a man who, despite all the difficulties in life, believed in love. Their relationship grew quickly. They walked together on the banks of the Neva River, watched the sunset on the top of the hills, and dreamed of a future where they would have a simple house, full of children and peaceful nights, to the sound of the balalika. For Viktor, Anna was the very meaning of home. But that home would soon be threatened by forces far greater than either of them could control. In 1939, the war began to cast its shadow over Europe. Tensions grew by the day, and rumors that the Soviet Union might be drawn into the conflict began to come true in June 1941, when Hitler ordered the German invasion of Russia at the so-called Operation Barbarossa. Leningrad, the city closest to where Viktor lived, became a strategic target, and all young men of military age were called up to defend their homeland. When Viktor received his summons, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew that going to war meant saying goodbye to everything he loved, especially Anna. The night before they left, the two met in their favorite place, a hidden clearing near the river. Anna was silent, holding his hand tightly, as if trying to memorize every detail of him before time and distance separated them. "Do you promise you will come back to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Viktor hesitated for a moment. He wanted to promise, wanted to say that nothing in the world could keep him away from her, but the reality was cruel. He knew that promises made in times of war were as fragile as glass. Still, he held her face in his hands and murmured, "I love you, Anna, and as long as my heart beats, it will be yours." The next day he left. The train that took him to the front was full of young people like him, some excited, others terrified. Viktor kept his gaze fixed on the station until he could no longer see Anna. His heart ached, but he needed to be strong. War called him, and he could not refuse. In the months that followed, he wrote to Anna whenever he could. Letters full of hope, full of love. He told about the difficult moments, but also about the small moments of beauty, like the sunrise washing over the battlefield, or the silent nights under a starry sky. Every word was a promise that he was still there, that he was still fighting to get back to her. But the war was not kind to his dreams. In December 1942, Viktor and his unit were sent into one of the most brutal battles of the siege of Leningrad. It was bitter cold, where the snow mixed with the soldiers' blood. It was that night, amid explosions and incessant gunfire, that Viktor felt death approaching. Wounded and without the strength to continue, he used the last of his energy to write a last letter to Anna. "My sweet Anna, if you are reading this letter, it means I have not returned to you." It was the last thing he wrote before the war took him forever. The letter, however, never reached its destination. Amid the chaos of battle, it was lost, buried by snow, buried by time. Anna waited for him for years, never receiving an answer. Until, one day, time decided to bring back the message that Victor desperately tried to send. Decades later, that same letter was now in the hands of Alexei, the historian who had just discovered one of the most touching love stories of the Second World War. But the story was far from over. There were still unanswered questions. There were still secrets to be revealed. And, above all, there was still a love that, despite time and war, had never been forgotten. The winter of 1941 arrived with a biting cold that seemed to herald what was to come. The Soviet Union was at war. The Nazi invasion was advancing rapidly, and each passing day made the situation more desperate. Leningrad, the city where Victor grew up and where Anna waited for him, was surrounded. The enemy was at the door, and the battle that was unfolding would be one of the most brutal in history. When Viktor Petrov was called to serve, he felt his fate was already sealed. Like all young people of his generation, he had no choice. The army needed soldiers, and he was taken for training before being sent to the front. Anna's farewell was etched in her memory like a wound that would never heal. She cried, holding his hands as if she could stop him from leaving. "I'll wait for you," she whispered, her eyes full of fear. He didn't know what to answer. "How can you promise something you might never be able to fulfill?" Deep down, he knew that many of those who left never returned. But even so, he tried to smile and said, "No matter what happens, Anna, I will always be with you." She cupped his face with her shaking hands and kissed him one last time. The kiss tasted like tears, like goodbye, like a love that tried to resist war. Military training was brutal. Victor quickly learned that war was not like the storybooks he read as a child. Here, there, was no glory, only survival. Every day on the battlefield was a fight against fear, hunger, and the cold that seemed to freeze the bones. He was sent to fight in Battle of Leningrad, one of the cruelest conflicts of the Second World War. The siege imposed by the Nazis lasted almost 900 days, and within the city, horror spread. The extreme cold, lack of food, and constant bombs turned Leningrad into hell on earth. But Victor was not within the walls. He was in the frozen fields, holding a rifle. With numb hands, trying to stop the enemy from advancing. Each night at the front was a reminder that he might never see Anna again. The trenches were covered with snow, and the sound of bombs never stopped. Victor slept little and poorly, always with one eye open, always ready to grab his weapon if the enemy tried to advance. He had already seen comrades die alongside him, some without even having time to scream. Fear was part of everyday life, but more than that, longing. In his darkest moments, he held on to the small photo of Anna that he carried with him. It was his only piece of happiness, the only thing that reminded him of what he was fighting to protect. In the first few months, Victor managed to send a few letters to Anna. They were simple messages, but full of emotion. He described what he saw, but never told the true extent of the horror. He didn't want her to know about the frozen bodies that piled up around the trenches, the screams of pain from the wounded soldiers who couldn't be rescued, the hunger that made their comrades eat anything they found. Instead, he talked about the sun rising over the snow-capped hills, about the small moments of silence between explosions, about how the night sky seemed infinite even in times of war. But then the letters stopped arriving. Anna waited, day after day, and nothing came. Winter passed, and spring arrived, and she still had no news. The city of Leningrad suffered from the siege. People died of hunger in the streets, and survivors learned to live with the pain of uncertainty. Every time a postman passed by, his heart quickened in the hope that this time there would be a message from Victor. But the weeks turned into months, and the months began to turn into years. Anna didn't know, but Victor was still writing. He never stopped writing. He wrote on scraps of paper he could find, using charcoal from improvised fires. He wrote even when his hands shook with cold, even when his hunger made his vision dark. He wrote because it was the only way to keep alive the hope that he would return to her. In December 1942, the war became even more cruel. The German army intensified its attacks, and Victor was sent on a desperate mission. His unit was ordered to advance against enemy lines, a suicide attack that few would survive. The night before, Victor sat in a secluded corner of the trench and wrote his last letter. His hands were bruised, the ink was sparse, but he put his whole soul into those words. "My sweet Anna, if you are reading this letter, it means I have not returned to you." He talked about his love, about the dreams that would never come true, about how he wished to have one more night with her. He asked her not to cry for him, but to live, that he would find happiness somehow, even if he was no longer there. He ended the letter with his last declaration of love. If there is a beyond, I hope to meet you there, and we will dance under the stars. He folded the paper carefully, placed it inside an envelope, and placed it in the inside pocket of his coat. But the letter was never delivered. The next morning, Victor and his unit advanced against enemy forces. Explosions covered the battlefield, and gunshots echoed from all sides. Victor ran, firing his gun, until a bullet pierced his chest. He fell into the snow, his vision darkening as he felt the cold of death approaching. The last thing he saw before he closed his eyes was the sky, the same sky he and Anna used to dream under. The snow fell on his body, and there he remained, along with his letter, buried by time. Anna never knew what happened. She waited and waited and waited, until time took away even hope. But decades later, a historian found that forgotten letter, and when he read it, he realized that that love story still needed to be told. This story is just beginning, and there is much more to be discovered. If you are enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to follow every detail of this exciting journey. Now, let's continue and delve into the exact moment Victor wrote his last letter. What's going on in the heart of a man who knows he might be saying goodbye forever? The icy wind blew mercilessly over the trench where Viktor Petrov was sheltering. The snow fell slowly, covering the bodies of the fallen soldiers like a silent blanket of war. In the distance, the sound of gunshots and explosions echoed, but for a brief moment, everything seemed far away. The world around Victor was falling apart, but inside him, only one thought persisted: Anna. He felt the weight of his cold-soaked coat and the rifle that now felt more like an extension of his own body. His hands were shaking, not only from the harsh winter, but from exhaustion and the certainty that that night could be his last. Victor knew that the German army was preparing a dawn attack, and that his unit had been ordered to hold out to the last man. There would be no reinforcements, there would be no retreat. At that moment, feeling death getting closer and closer, he made a decision. If he couldn't go back to Anna, he would at least leave her something that could cut through time, war, and darkness. With numb fingers, he pulled from his pocket a crumpled piece of paper that he had carried with him for months. The damp from the cold had damaged part of it, but it was still possible to write. He picked up a pencil stub, broken and worn, and placed the paper on top of an ammunition box. The dim flame of a flickering candle illuminated his features as he wrote, "My sweet Anna, if you are reading this letter, it means I have not returned to you." He stopped for a moment, closing his eyes tightly, trying to muster the strength to continue. I wanted to find the right words, but how do you say goodbye to someone you love? How do you say goodbye to the woman who was your home, your hope, your reason for existing? The tip of the pencil slid across the paper again. I want so much to be by your side right now, holding your hand, hearing your laugh as we walk along the riverbank. I would give anything to have one more day with you, to tell you looking into your eyes how much I love you. A gust of wind made the candle's flame waver, and Victor instinctively lowered the paper to protect it. He looked around. The other soldiers in the trench were silent, lost in their own thoughts, perhaps writing similar letters to their families. Perhaps just praying. He started writing again. The war took me from you, but it never took you from me. Every cold night, every battle, every moment of despair, it was your face that kept me strong. It was the memory of your smile that kept me going when everything seemed lost. His chest hurt. The longing was so intense that he could almost smell Anna's hair, the warmth of her hands, the sweet sound of her voice calling his name. But the reality was cruel. He sighed, trying to contain the pain that was growing inside him. I know I promised to return. I know I said nothing could separate us. But, my beloved, if this letter reached you, it means that the war was stronger than my promises. Victor gripped the pencil tighter, his writing becoming a little shakier. Don't cry for me, Anna. Live for both of us. I don't want my absence to be a prison for you. I want you to love, to smile, to find happiness, even if I'm not by your side. He stopped for a moment and looked up at the sky. The cold seemed less intense now, or perhaps he was simply becoming desensitized to it. If there is a beyond, I hope to meet you there, and we will dance under the stars. He signed his name carefully, folding the paper with all the delicacy his war-hardened hands could still manage. He looked at the letter for a long moment, as if engraving each word into his soul. It was then that a call echoed through the trench. "Victor, it's time." He kept the letter in the inside pocket of his coat, very close to his heart. He stood up and held his rifle, preparing himself for what was to come. War did not wait for love letters, and when the sun rose that morning, Victor rushed to the battlefield, along with his companions. The shot that hit his chest was quick, the pain intense, but brief. He fell into the cold snow, the sky becoming a blur before his eyes. The letter remained in his pocket, protected by his body until the last moment. And there it remained, buried by snow, lost in time. Decades later, when she was finally found, her words still had the power to touch hearts. Victor is gone, but his love is not. And Anna, without knowing it, waited for a letter that time never allowed to arrive. Time is a silent guardian of stories that should never be forgotten. For years, Victor's last letter lay dormant, hidden beneath the frozen earth, as if the war itself had tried to silence it. But time, no matter how cruel it is, sometimes allows itself to undo its mistakes. The trench where Victor fell was covered in snow for months after that battle ended. When spring finally arrived, the soldiers' bodies were hastily buried amid the chaos of war. Many, like Victor, were considered missing, their names engraved on monuments and their faces forgotten by the world. Decades passed. The scars of war were being swallowed by nature and progressed. The soil that was once the scene of battles turned into peaceful fields, where the grass grew without knowing that, beneath it, lay memories and secrets. It was only in the year 1998 that Victor's letter found its way back to the surface. A group of Russian archaeologists and historians, in partnership with foreign researchers, began an excavation project on the former battlefields of the Second World War. The intention was to recover historical remains that could help fill in the gaps left by time. That area, on the outskirts of Leningrad today, St. Petersburg, still held many mysteries. Relics of soldiers who never returned home began to emerge under the careful shovels of excavators. Rusty helmets, pieces of uniforms, weapons destroyed by time. And then, one of them found something different. In the middle of the hardened mud was an old military coat, surprisingly well preserved by the cold and controlled humidity of the ground. Inside the pocket, protected as if Victor still held it, was the letter. The same letter as the researcher, Alexei Mikhailov, had found in that old trunk in the attic. At the laboratory, experts in restoring historical documents worked for weeks to preserve the letter. The paper, fragile with time, needed to be treated with precise techniques so that it did not fall apart when handled. When they finally managed to open the envelope and read the words written by Victor, emotion took over everyone in the room. It was as if the war had spoken directly from the past. Each line carried the pain, love, and hope of a man who knew he would never see his beloved again. It was a testament to a time when life was stolen without warning and where goodbyes were often only thought of. The story of Victor and Anna, which until then had been lost to time, was beginning to come to life again. But there was a problem. No one knew who Anna was. The researchers knew they needed to find the recipient of that letter. Would she still be alive? Did he have a happy life? Did she somehow know that Victor never forgot her? The investigation began with military files. They found Victor's name in World War II records, but there was no mention of a or wife. The surname Anna was not listed in official documents, and finding a woman by her first name alone was like looking for a star in the sky. The team then decided to do something different. They released the story to the press. Russian and international newspapers published articles about the discovery of the letter. The headline was always the same: "A letter lost in the war has been found." And what it said broke hearts. The commotion was immediate. People from all over the world were moved by Victor and Anna's story. Similar letters from soldiers who never returned began to be remembered, and families of veterans began looking for answers about their own loved ones. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman, resident of a village on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, went to a local police station with a newspaper clipping in hand. His wrinkled hands shook as he placed the paper on the counter and whispered, "That's my Victor." Anna was still alive. Now, after more than half a century, she would finally receive the letter she had been waiting for her entire life. Life went on, even when Anna felt like time had stopped the day Victor left. When he boarded the train that would take him to war, she stood there on the platform, watching the smoke from the locomotive dissipate into the cold air. He held the scarf Victor gave him as a souvenir to his chest. His scent still permeated the fabric. At that moment, she still believed that the war would end quickly, that he would return to her arms as he promised. But the months turned into years, and the reality was crushing. During the first few months, Anna received letters from Victor. Each envelope that arrived was like a breath of life. She read and reread his words, imagining him sitting in some corner of the front, with calloused hands and a heart full of longing. She responded to each one, writing by the dim light of a candle, telling him about the village, about how cold the days were, and how she dreamed of the moment when he would return. But then, silence came. The letters stopped arriving. The winter of 1942 was the worst. The war had turned Leningrad into a city under siege, and hunger had become as cruel an enemy as enemy soldiers. Anna began to count the days without hearing from Victor, at the same time as she counted the remaining grains of flour in her kitchen. Each day without an answer was a blow to her heart, but she refused to believe the worst. She went to the train station every day, where some women waited for those returning. Some welcomed their husbands, brothers and children. Others only received official letters of mourning. Anna received neither one thing nor the other, just emptiness. She refused to give up. He promised to come back, she said to herself, but time held no promises. As the years passed, people around her began to urge her to move on. Victor won't be back, they said with regret, but Anna didn't want to accept it. Until 1945, when the war officially ended, she still hoped to see Victor return along the dirt road, but he never came back. The years passed and Anna continued as best she could. I needed to survive, and that meant accepting life without Victor. She tried to build a future, but the war had taken more than her great love. She lost friends, she lost family, she lost her innocence. Eventually, she married a man from the village, a widower, who, like her, had lost someone in the war. The marriage was silent, without passion, but with mutual respect. Together, they had children. Anna raised them as best she could, but never told them about Victor. Some pain, she thought, should remain buried. But every night, before going to sleep, she whispered a prayer. If you're still there, Victor, know that I've never forgotten you. Decades later, when Anna was an elderly woman, her memories of Victor were like distant shadows, something that belonged to a past life. She learned to live with absence, to find comfort in the little moments of life, until, one day, everything changed. When he saw the newspaper report about the letter found on an old battlefield, time seemed to collapse around him. His trembling fingers slowly passed over the name written on the paper, Victor Petrov. It was him. His heart raced like it hadn't done in a long time. The words began to jumble before her teary eyes. The letter, the one that never arrived, had finally been found. And now, after more than half a century, Anna would have the answer she had been waiting for all her life. Time can erase faces, soften memories, but it never erases true love. Anna, now with her hair as white as the snow that covered Victor's battlefields, sat at the table in her small home. The newspaper with the article about the letter was folded beside him. His wrinkled hands, which had carried children, prepared meals, and endured decades of loneliness, trembled as he held the envelope given to him by the researchers. It was like holding a piece of Victor, as if he was there, on the other side of that aged paper, waiting to speak to you one last time. Anna's eyes were teary before she even opened the letter. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his heart that seemed to have become young again. With hesitant fingers, he slid them across the paper yellowed with age, and finally began to read. My sweet Anna, if you are reading this letter, it means I have not returned to you. The room dissolved around him. The gift disappeared, and Anna was transported to that distant day when she saw Victor leave. She could hear him, feel his presence, as if the letter had reached across the decades to bring him back to her. Her tears fell onto the paper as she read each word. I want so much to be by your side right now, holding your hand, hearing your laugh as we walk along the riverbank. I would give anything to have one more day with you. But to tell you, looking into your eyes, how much I love you. Anna put her hand over her mouth, trying to contain the tears that threatened to escape. He never forgot her. During all that time at the front, amidst the pain and horror of war, it was there that Victor found the strength to continue. She continued reading, her trembling hands clutching the paper as if she feared it would disappear. I know I promised to return. I know I said nothing could separate us. But, my beloved, if this letter reached you, it means that the war was stronger than my promises. His chest tightened. How she waited, how she wished that he had returned, that promise had been fulfilled. But the war took Victor before he could keep his word. Anna closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the pain of all those years of waiting without answers. But there was more. She needed to continue. Don't cry for me, Anna. Live for both of us. I don't want my absence to be a prison for you. I want you to love, to smile, to find happiness, even if I'm not by your side. Those words broke his heart. How do you move forward when part of you has always been stuck in the past? How do you find happiness when the love of your life has been ripped away from you? And then, the last sentence made his vision blurred with tears. If there is a beyond, I hope to meet you there, and we will dance under the stars. Anna couldn't hold back crying any longer. The letter fell gently onto the table as she covered her face with her hands. For decades, she lived without knowing what had happened to Victor. For decades, their hope slowly faded until it became just a distant whisper. And now, after so long, he finally came back to her. His children and grandchildren, who were around him, were also crying. They never knew their grandmother's true story. They never knew about the love that was stolen from her by the war. But now, seeing her hold that letter as if it were the most precious thing in the world, they understood. Silence took over the house for a few moments. Anna then looked out the window at the sky, where the stars were beginning to appear on the horizon, and smiled. Because, somehow, I knew Victor was there, waiting for her. And when the time came, they would finally dance under the stars. Viktor Petrov's final words echoed through time, through decades of silence, snow and war, until they finally reached Anna's hands. If there is a beyond, I hope to meet you there, and we will dance under the stars. This sentence, simple and at the same time so profound, carried the entire essence of the unshakable love that Victor felt for Anna. But to understand the true weight of these words, it was necessary to go back in time, to the origin of this promise. Ever since they met, Victor and Anna had a habit. Whenever they were together, they looked at the sky. In the early days of their relationship, when they met secretly in the village, they used to lie on the grass, watching the stars and dreaming about the future. Where do you want to travel first? Victor asked, holding her hand. Anywhere where we can be together, Anna replied with a smile. Victor then joked, so, when this is all over, let's dance under the stars. It was a naive promise, perhaps even childish, but full of hope. For Victor, the sky was a reminder that there was something greater than war, something that couldn't be destroyed by bombs or bullets. And it was this same thought that accompanied him in the darkest moments of the battle. When he felt like he might not survive, he looked up at the sky and remembered that promise. That was why, when writing his last letter, he repeated those words. It was his way of saying that, even if the war separated them, nothing could erase the love he felt for Anna. When Anna read the last sentence of the letter, something inside her changed. For years, she carried with her the pain of uncertainty. The lack of answers consumed her, and the war forced her to move on, without being able to say goodbye. But now, with those words in front of her, it all made sense. Victor hasn't forgotten her. He thought about her until the last moment. The war tried to steal everything from them, but it couldn't erase the love they shared. Anna spent the rest of her days with that letter always close by. I read and reread his words, as if they were a whisper coming from the past. And when he left a farewell message written on the back of the letter. I'm coming to find you. And this time, we're going to dance under the stars. Victor and Anna's story became more than a war story. It became a testimony to the power of love, hope, and the promise of reunions beyond time. Victor's last message wasn't just a farewell. It was a reminder that true love never dies. And somewhere, under an infinite sky of stars, two hearts that war tried to separate could finally meet. As dusk approached, the silence of that small town seemed to whisper stories of a past that, although painful, carried a unique beauty. It was in this scenario that Victor and Anna's journey ended, a narrative that spanned decades, wars and tears, but which remained unshakable as the purest form of love. Anna, whose life was marked by absence and waiting, learned over time to transform pain into memory, and longing into a bond that never breaks. In her final days, she found comfort in revisiting every word written by Victor, words that, even impregnated with the cold of a time of conflict, warmed her heart with the certainty of eternal love. Each page of that letter, carefully preserved, was like a bridge that connected the two lovers, proving that, even separated by death and the cruel fate of war, the feeling that united them was never extinguished. For those who have been following this story, Victor and Anna's narrative is more than a historical account. It is an invitation to reflect on the values that really matter in life. In a world where ephemerality seems to dominate, where promises are lost amid the chaos of everyday life, the love of these two characters reminds us that the human essence resists time. Victor's memory, eternalized in every letter and line of his last message, inspires us to recognize that emotional bonds are capable of transcending even the most insurmountable barriers, such as death itself. The legacy of this story has spread across generations. Victor's letter, displayed in museums and remembered by those who saw it with eyes of hope, became a symbol of the courage to love in times of uncertainty. People began to see beyond the figures and horrors of war, focusing on the feeling that, even in the most adverse conditions, found a way to manifest itself with intensity and purity. This narrative became a reminder that, in the midst of devastation and loss, the seed of hope can still flourish, capable of rebuilding confidence in tomorrow. At the memorial erected in honor of Victor and Anna, visitors from all over the world stopped to reflect. There, amid old photos and emotional stories, each person found a mirror for their own stories of love, loss, and reunion. It was impossible not to be moved when seeing an elderly couple walking slowly through the museum garden, or when reading the dedications left by young lovers who found inspiration in the letter to not give up on their feelings. This exhibition became a celebration of life, a tribute to the human capacity to love, even when circumstances seemed to conspire towards separation. Anna's life, marked by decades of waiting, also reveals the resilience of the human spirit. She learned that, although time erases the contours of faces and softens the pain of separation, it can never extinguish the flames of true love. Every dawn brought with it the memory of the moments lived alongside Victor, the smiles shared, the dreams woven together under the starry sky, and above all, the certainty that, somewhere beyond the borders of existence, the reunion awaited. At the end of her journey, Anna left a last message for the world, a discreet but meaningful message. "I'm coming to find you, and this time, we're going to dance under the stars." These words, echoing Victor's promise, sealed the fate of a love that never faded. They were testimony to a story in which time was unable to erase the mark of a feeling that transcends life itself. Today, when looking at the night sky, it is impossible not to imagine Victor and Anna reunited in an eternal embrace, dancing under the stars that were witnesses of their happiest moments. This vision invites us to reflect on our own lives and the importance of nurturing the bonds that make us truly human. In a world that often seems devoid of meaning and where loss can seem unbearable, the story of these two lovers serves as a beacon, reminding us that love is the force that holds us together, even when everything around us falls apart. In the silence of a calm night, listening to the whisper of the wind, it is possible to imagine that the echo of Victor's letter still vibrates in the air, telling each open heart that love, even in adversity, finds a way to perpetuate itself. This narrative, full of pain, hope, and redemption, is an invitation for each of us to remember that, no matter how difficult the journey may seem, there is always a brightness on the horizon, a promise of reunion, happiness, and a love that, somehow, is never lost. And so, with this reflection, the story of Victor and Anna ends, leaving us with the certainty that, although time is relentless, it also has the ability to immortalize the feelings that really matter, a memory that lives in every heart that dares to love. If you've made it this far, it means this story touched your heart. Victor and Anna taught us that true love resists time, distance, and even war. If this story moved you, if you believe that love is stronger than any obstacle, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. And now, I want to hear from you. If you could write one last letter to someone special, what would you say? Comment below. True love never dies, and tell me what moved you most about this story. Let's talk in the comments. Your support is essential so that more people know stories like this.